What if everything you thought you knew about Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s final moments was only part of the story? His crash was witnessed by millions, but what the autopsy revealed behind closed doors was far more heartbreaking than anyone expected. From hidden injuries to emotional discoveries that shocked even those closest to him. This isn't just a racing tragedy. It's a personal one. Stick around, because the truth isn't what you think. He wasn't just a racer. He was a force of nature with a mustache and mirrored sunglasses, a legend in black who ruled the oval like a king on a throne of asphalt. Dale Earnhardt Sr. didn't just drive cars, he commanded them. With 76 victories and millions earned on the track, he built a legacy that didn't just live in NASCAR history books, it lived in the thunder of engines and the roar of Southern crowds. But all of that came to a screeching halt on February 18, 2001, during the final lap of the Daytona 500. What looked like another minor scrape in a race full of high-speed bumps turned out to be the last move he'd ever make. And just like that, NASCAR's fiercest warrior was gone, not with a spectacle, but with a silence that swallowed the sport whole. It wasn't just another race. Daytona was Earnhardt's temple. He'd won there, he'd suffered there, he'd become immortal there. That day, he wasn't chasing the checkered flag for himself. He was playing defense, clearing the path for his son, Dale Earnhardt Jr., and his teammate Michael Waltrip, who were gunning for first. The crowd didn't know it, but they were watching something more profound than competition. They were watching a father shield his son at 180 miles per hour. Blocking, swerving, holding the line. Dale Sr. was the buffer between chaos and glory. It was an act of control. Until, suddenly, it wasn't. In the blink of an eye, Turn 4 changed everything. Sterling Marlin's car edged just enough to tap Dale's left rear. A nudge so subtle it barely registered. But at that speed, subtle is all it takes. Dale's black number 3 veered down slightly, then jolted back up. Ken Schrader's car clipped him, and in an instant, the Intimidator was nose first into the outside wall. No flips, no flames, no spectacular carnage. Just a thud and a slide. Fans didn't gasp. They waited for him to climb out, to brush off the dust and wave. But Dale didn't move. Ken Schrader reached him first. He got out of his own wrecked machine and ran to Earnhardt's driver's side window. Then he backed away. Fast. His face changed, his shoulders dropped. He didn't need words. What he saw inside that car told him everything. And what he saw, he never described in detail. Not out of respect, but because he knew what lifelessness looked like. The silence in pit row said more than any announcement could. Medical teams arrived, pulled Dale from the cockpit, and rushed him to Halifax Medical Center. The clock ticked. The world held its breath. The race had ended, but the real story was just beginning. At 5:16 p.m., the confirmation came. Dale Earnhardt Sr. was gone. That answer came in the form of a clinical report that would change racing forever. A basilar skull fracture. A break so severe at the base of the skull it shut down brain function in an instant. The kind of trauma that doesn't allow for pain or panic, just sudden nothingness. The impact forced his head forward and backward in a deadly whip, the force too much for even a veteran like Earnhardt to survive. It wasn't violent to the eyes, but inside, it was devastating. There were other injuries, broken ribs, chest trauma, a fractured ankle, but none of it mattered compared to that single, lethal fracture. Rumors flew fast. Some said the seatbelt failed. Others whispered it had been modified. But emergency responders at the scene dismissed that. The belt held. It wasn't the equipment that failed. It was the system. And part of that system was the lack of the HANS device, a head and neck support designed to reduce this exact injury. It wasn't required at the time, and Earnhardt had refused to wear one, believing it restricted his movement. He wasn't alone in that belief. But that belief vanished overnight. What happened next wasn't just protocol. It was a crusade. NASCAR opened an investigation that touched every inch of that race. Every angle of video was dissected. Every part of the number 3 was analyzed. Engineers, doctors, and safety experts were pulled in. What they found was sobering. The cars were too stiff. The walls didn't give. The cockpit was a cage. And the safety expectations that drivers had grown used to were no longer acceptable. Within months, a revolution began. The HANS device, mandatory. The tracks, outfitted with safer barriers that absorbed impact. Cockpits were redesigned. Seats cradled the head and shoulders. Helmets got smarter. NASCAR didn't just evolve, it transformed. Dale Earnhardt's death was a pivot point, a heartbreaking sacrifice that rewrote the rulebook. He didn't just leave behind a legacy of speed and wins, he left behind safety reforms that would protect every driver who strapped in after him. That wasn't just a legacy, it was a lifeline. Tributes came in waves. Fans left flowers at Daytona. Racers wore black stripes. The number 3 became more than a car. It became a monument. Dale had once said he wanted to go out on his own terms. And in some quiet, tragic way, he did. But for his son, who had to witness it all from the front of the pack, the grief was more than symbolic. It was a wound that never quite closed. Dale Jr. carried that weight forward, with wins, with advocacy, with a presence that reminded everyone what it meant to race not just for glory, but for safety. Because if a tap on turn 4 can take down a giant, no one is untouchable. That reality reshaped NASCAR, not with fury but with resolve. And that's how one man's final lap became the start of something bigger than himself. And just like that, NASCAR's heartbeat changed. One crash, one final lap. And suddenly, a sport defined by risk had no choice but to confront what it had long ignored. The silence that followed Dale Earnhardt's impact wasn't just the absence of engine roars. It was the sound of an entire industry realizing it had been too late. The response was swift, but also haunting. For many, it felt like trying to unring a bell. The shift began behind the scenes, in a building no one had heard of until then, NASCAR's Research and Development Center. It wasn't just another facility, it was a statement. Engineers, trauma experts, and crash scientists were brought in, not to rewrite the past, but to protect the future. Racing had flirted with danger for too long. Now it had to get serious about survival. The first game-changer was the HANS device. Until then, it had been treated like an optional nuisance by many drivers. But after February 18, 2001, there was no room for defiance. This neck restraint, connecting helmet to shoulders, could have changed everything for Dale. The violent motion that shattered his skull would have been stopped cold. That realization shook everyone because it wasn't theory. It was reality missed by inches. What came next changed the tracks themselves. The invention of the safer barrier, foam and steel layered like armor, transformed bare concrete death traps into energy-absorbing buffers. It wasn't some cosmetic fix. It cut crash forces dramatically. It was rolled out at Indy first, but when drivers saw the numbers, no one needed convincing. If those walls could have softened Earnhardt's final hit, then maybe that number 3 would have made it to the finish line. Even the cars were redesigned from the inside out. The car of tomorrow wasn't just a name, it was a manifesto. Wider frames, stronger roofs, energy-absorbing materials. Everything rebuilt with one mission: to stop history from repeating itself. Earnhardt's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a blueprint for reform. Every modification whispered the same question: what if we had done this sooner? Still, the reaction was complicated. Longtime fans, those who'd grown up watching wild sprints and high-stakes gambles, feared NASCAR was losing its edge. Some accused the league of using Earnhardt's name to sell change. But deep down, even the loudest critics knew. This wasn't about making racing soft. It was about keeping legends alive. Drivers, too, had their reckonings. The same competitors who once scoffed at head restraints now wouldn't race without them. That February crash had burned a new truth into their minds. Invincibility was an illusion. The toughest man in the sport was gone in a second. That sobered even the boldest hearts. Pit crews, once laser-focused on speed and performance, turned their attention to drills, simulations, and data. Safety wasn't a footnote anymore. It was the story. The way races were prepared, analyzed, and dissected. Everything changed. And Dale? He never left. His image was everywhere. His number 3, now almost sacred, became a symbol of what the sport had lost and what it swore to protect. And then came the miracle. Years passed, cars flipped, engines exploded, steel bent and shattered. But not one driver died. Not a single fatality in a major NASCAR race since that day in 2001. Crashes that once would have been funerals turned into survival stories. Each time a driver walked away, people said the same thing. Dale saved them. But behind the applause was something quieter, something colder, the truth. And it sat buried in a report that few had the strength to read. The autopsy didn't just describe what happened. It revealed everything the public didn't want to know. Earnhardt's skull fracture wasn't just lethal. It was instant. The kind of injury where lights go out before pain even arrives. He didn't suffer, they said. But somehow that hurt even more. The man who had stared down death for decades had no final words, no heroic last effort. Just a snap of physics and silence. The damage went beyond the head. Broken ribs, a shattered sternum, ankle trauma. His body told the story his mouth never could. And then there was the seatbelt. Had it failed? Had it been cut? Rumors flew. Photos showed tears. Experts debated. One paramedic insisted the belt was secure. Team members claimed otherwise. Inconsistencies piled up like wreckage. Even the seat positioning became suspect. Was Earnhardt sitting too low? Too far back? Was it his preference? Or an oversight that cost him his life? There were no definitive answers, only more questions. And perhaps the most devastating one. Could all of this have been avoided? And that's when the conspiracy theories began. Some fans refused to accept the findings. They whispered that the report had been altered, that the truth had been buried to protect NASCAR's image. Others suggested Dale had pre-existing injuries, never disclosed. It didn't matter how many pages were released or how many experts weighed in. Doubt had already taken root. The real transformation, though, came from the inside. The autopsy wasn't closure. It was a trigger. It forced the sport to finally admit tradition had become a liability. If Earnhardt, a man who had walked away from so many wrecks, could fall to a crash that looked unremarkable, then the danger was deeper than anyone thought. The Hanas device went from optional to essential. That was no coincidence. It was the image of that black car hitting the wall. The echo of the crowd going silent. The stillness of the wreckage. That image rewrote minds. And NASCAR didn't stop there. A massive 300-page document, the Earnhardt Report, laid out everything in cold scientific detail. Camera angles, crash physics, seatbelt tests. It was definitive. If the right equipment had been used, he would have walked away. That stunned the racing world, because it meant the crash wasn't too severe. It was survivable, and that shook people more than anything else. From that moment on, safety wasn't just a feature. It was the foundation. Cockpits changed, seat angles, impact foam, data recorders, harness rules. Safer barriers became the norm. Every choice, every tweak carried Dale's shadow. But even as NASCAR moved forward, the whispers stayed. Was everything told? Was everything done? And still, one question lingers every time the checkered flag falls. How close did we come? to losing someone again. Education, business, and culture in ways that no one could have foreseen. Behind the roar of engines and tributes painted on metal, his impact quietly shaped the future of NASCAR. Not just in the way cars were built, but in the way lives were lived. Even competitors who once saw him as the fearless intimidator now admit, he gave them more than competition. He gave them a standard, one they could never ignore again. But here's the twist that catches even the most seasoned fans off guard. The transformation didn't end with safety gear and tearful interviews. It reshaped the business of racing itself. Dale Earnhardt's legacy morphed into an empire, one that touched everything from sponsorships to technology partnerships, from the merchandise on fans' backs to the innovations in their favorite drivers' cockpits. His death didn't halt his influence. It supercharged it. Suddenly there was a deeper narrative, one that proved even after the checkered flag drops, a story can accelerate. And speaking of acceleration, Dale Earnhardt's lifestyle off the track reflected his on-track hunger for precision and excellence. He was never one to flaunt excess, but make no mistake, he lived like a king of speed. His car collection was nothing short of legendary. From a blacked-out Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS to rare Corvettes and Camaros, each vehicle was a reflection of his identity. American muscle, unshakable grit, and bold elegance. Watches? He leaned toward high-performance timepieces like Tag Heuer and Rolex, subtly worn yet always timed to perfection. His properties spanned from a sprawling estate in Mooresville, North Carolina, complete with a private lake, to custom-built garages for his prized vehicles. And while he didn't boast a fleet of private jets, he did own and fly in his own Beechcraft aircraft, a nod to his taste for speed even at 10,000 feet. Financially, Dale Earnhardt wasn't just a driver. He was a mogul in disguise. He co-founded Dale Earnhardt Inc., turning it into a powerhouse with strategic alliances with brands like Wrangler, GM Goodwrench, and Coca-Cola. His face appeared on more than just race posters. It was on die-cast cars, hats, jackets, and even cologne. He was among the first drivers to truly understand the value of brand equity in racing. His insurance policies were comprehensive, covering career-ending injuries and high-value assets, ensuring his family and business were never left vulnerable. The lesson? Never treat your talent like it's temporary. Build for longevity. Protect what matters. But what fans remember isn't just the roar of his engine or the swagger of his walk. It's what happened after. The way his son, Dale Earnhardt Jr., stepped into the void, not to replace, but to honor. Jr. raced with a quiet fire. He didn't just win, he endured. His 15-year streak as the sport's most popular driver wasn't just about charm. It was about carrying a memory that never got lighter. When Jr. built his own racing team, when he shared his mental health battles publicly, when he mentored young drivers with a steady hand, you could feel his father's fingerprints in every decision. Let's not forget the ripple effect. Racing wasn't the only arena that changed. Other sports started revisiting their safety protocols. Hollywood studios producing racing films consulted NASCAR engineers. Even automotive manufacturers began rethinking cockpit safety and restraint systems for road cars. One man's final lap ended up protecting millions. Yet the most powerful impact came in quiet places. In driver briefings where young racers were reminded why they wore HANS devices. In the tear-filled eyes of fans who return each year to Turn 4 at Daytona to lay flowers. In the letters sent to Earnhardt's family from soldiers, firefighters, and everyday people who said, "He made us brave." And if you're wondering what remains, listen to the track. Hear that engine? That's not just speed. That's survival singing. That's a community forever shaped by one man's unwilling sacrifice. Every time a driver crashes and walks away, every time a rookie straps into a safer seat, every time a fan whispers "3" under their breath, they're keeping the story alive. The truth is, Dale Earnhardt didn't just transform NASCAR. He redefined how we talk about loss, legacy, and what it means to truly matter. His story wasn't about a crash. It was about the chain reaction it set off. One that turned one man's end into the beginning of safety, of unity, and of hope for an entire generation. Because in the end, he wasn't just in the race, he was the race. And long after the checkered flag, Dale Earnhardt still leads, just in a different lane now. If this video hit you in the feels or gave you a new perspective, go ahead and give it a like. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts or memories of Dale. And don't forget to subscribe. We've got more powerful stories from the world of racing and beyond coming your way soon. Because legends like Dale, they don't just drive fast, they leave tracks on our souls. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep your eyes on the road and your heart in the story.